The piercing sound of medical alarms echoed through the pediatric emergency room at Children's Mercy Hospital in Kansas City as 7-year-old Paisley Mae Thompson's small body convulsed violently on the gurney. Blood stained the white hospital sheets beneath her as machines around her screamed warning that her vital signs were crashing at an alarming rate. Just 2 hours earlier, she had been playing hopscotch in her backyard, laughing with her younger brother, and chasing their golden retriever around the swing set when the first wave of blood came pouring from her mouth without warning. The transition from normal childhood afternoon to medical emergency had been so sudden and violent that her parents were still in shock. One moment, Paisley was winning at hopscotch, and the next, she was doubled over in the grass, vomiting blood while her mother screamed for her father to call an ambulance. The paramedics had arrived within minutes, but those minutes felt like hours as Brinley Thompson held her daughter's trembling body and watched the color drain from her face. "Get me 2 units of O-negative now, Dr. Brennan Ashford shouted as he sprinted down the corridor, his white coat flying behind him and his face a mask of controlled panic that he usually managed to hide from family. Behind him, nurses wheeled crash carts and IV stands in a desperate race against time, their footsteps echoing off the sterile walls like gunshots. The cancer that everyone believed had been defeated 6 months ago with aggressive chemotherapy and radiation had returned with a vengeance so swift and brutal that it was literally destroying Paisley's body from the inside out. Dr. Ashford had seen childhood cancer recurrences before, but nothing quite like this. The speed at which Paisley's condition was deteriorating suggested that the cancer had not only returned, but had developed resistance to every treatment they had used before. Her latest scans, taken just 3 weeks ago during a routine follow-up appointment, had shown no signs of malignancy. Now, her body was being overwhelmed by cancer cells that seemed to be multiplying by the hour. Maverick Thompson pressed his back against the wall outside the trauma room, his knees buckling as he watched medical staff swarm around his daughter through the glass window. His work clothes were still dirty from the construction site where he had been when Brinley's frantic call came through. He had dropped everything and driven home at dangerous speed, running red lights and praying to every deity he could think of that his little girl would be okay when he got there. Brinley clutched his arm so tightly that her fingernails drew blood through his shirt, but neither of them noticed the pain. They could only stare in absolute horror as their little girl fought for each breath, while machines fought to keep her heart beating in a steady rhythm. Brinley's mind kept replaying the morning conversation they had shared over breakfast, when Paisley had announced her plans to try out for the school soccer team in the fall. She had been so full of life and energy just hours ago. "Her organs are shutting down," a nurse whispered urgently to Dr. Ashford, not realizing that the parents could hear every word through the thin walls. "Liver function is at 12%. And dropping rapidly. Kidneys are barely responding to the medications. If we can't stabilize her in the next hour, we're going to lose her." The unfinished sentence hung in the air like a death sentence, and Maverick felt his world begin to collapse around him. This was supposed to be behind them. Paisley had undergone months of grueling treatment, had lost her beautiful blonde hair, had missed most of 2nd grade, had endured countless procedures and hospital stays, but she had beaten it. The doctors had told them she was in remission. They had celebrated with a family vacation to Disney World just last month. That's when Travis Kelce appeared at the end of the hallway, still wearing his practice gear and running at full speed toward the chaos. Sweat stained his Chiefs jersey, and his cleats clicked against the polished hospital floor as he sprinted past surprised nurses and visitors. He had promised Paisley weeks ago during a charity hospital visit that he would come back to see her during her recovery, never imagining he would arrive in the middle of what looked like her final moment. His agent had called him during practice with news that Paisley Thompson, the brave little girl who had captured his heart during his last hospital visit, was back in the emergency room and asking for him. Travis had immediately left practice, ignoring his coach's protest and driving straight to the hospital with his heart pounding in his chest. During the 20-minute drive, he had tried to prepare himself for what he might find, but nothing could have prepared him for this scene. Travis's face went white as he took in the devastating scene before him. The frantic medical team working with desperate efficiency, the parents pressed against the wall in shock, and the small figure on the gurney surrounded by more machines than seemed possible for one tiny body. The child he remembers, vibrant, full of fight, was now barely visible beneath tube, wires, and medical equipment. Through the glass window of the trauma room, Paisley's eyes suddenly fluttered open despite the chaos surrounding her. The oxygen mask covered half her face, and tubes snaked from both arms, but somehow she managed to turn her head toward the commotion in the hallway. Despite everything happening to her body, despite the pain and confusion and fear, she somehow recognized the tall figure standing frozen in the doorway. Her lips moved almost imperceptibly behind the plastic oxygen mask, and Travis had to step closer to the window to make out what she was trying to say. The effort it took her to speak was clearly enormous, but she was determined to communicate something important. Her small hand lifted slightly from the gurney, and she pointed weakly in his direction. "You came," she whispered, the words barely audible even to the medical staff working directly over her. Travis felt his knees nearly give out as he stared at the bravest person he had ever met, fighting for her life with everything she had left. In that moment, watching this 7-year-old girl summon the strength to acknowledge his presence, even while her body was failing, he realized he was about to witness either a miracle or a tragedy, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to control which one it would be. The question that would haunt him for the rest of his life formed in his mind as he watched Paisley's eyes flutter closed again. What do you say to a 7-year-old girl who might be dying? How do you bring hope to a situation that seems hopeless? And why had he made a promise to visit that might now become the last conversation he would ever have with her? Dr. Ashford pulled Maverick and Brinley into a small consultation room adjacent to the trauma bay, while the medical team continued their desperate efforts to stabilize Paisley. The room was sterile and cold, with motivational posters on the walls that seemed cruelly ironic given the circumstance. His hands shook slightly as he opened Paisley's medical chart, and Travis could see the exhaustion and frustration in the physician's eyes from where he stood in the hallway. This was clearly a man who had delivered devastating news to families countless times over his 20-year career, but something about this particular case had gotten under his professional skin. "I need to be completely honest with both of you about what we're facing here," Dr. Ashford began, his voice barely above a whisper as he struggled to find the right word. "The cancer hasn't just returned. It's metastasized aggressively to her liver, kidneys, and lungs simultaneously. The speed of this progression is unlike anything I've seen in 2 decades of pediatric oncology. Her body is essentially being attacked from multiple fronts at once, and her organs are failing faster than we can support them." The medical terminology felt heavy in the small room, each word landing like a physical blow to parents who were already reeling from the sudden turn their lives had taken. Brinley's sob echoed off the sterile walls as the reality of what the doctor was saying began to sink in. This wasn't just a setback or a complication. This was a complete catastrophic failure of everything they had fought so hard to achieve. "The tumor markers in her blood are the highest I've ever recorded in a pediatric patient," Dr. Ashford continued, his professional composure beginning to crack as he looked at the devastating numbers in front of him. "Her white blood cell count indicates that her immune system has completely collapsed, which explains why her body couldn't fight off this recurrence. Based on the current rate of organ failure and the aggressive nature of this particular cancer, we're looking at maybe 48 hours before her body simply can't continue fighting." The silence that followed was deafening. Maverick stared at the doctor as if he were speaking a foreign language, unable to process the concept that his daughter, his healthy, vibrant, soccer-playing daughter, could be dying. Brinley buried her face in her hand, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. "I'm sorry," Dr. Ashford added, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm so incredibly sorry to have to tell you this. Paisley is an extraordinary little girl, and she's fought harder than any patient I've ever treated. But sometimes, despite our best efforts and all the advances in modern medicine, we lose the fight, and I'm afraid we're going to lose Paisley." Travis stood in the doorway, feeling like an intruder on the family's most private nightmare. He had come to the hospital expecting to cheer up a little girl he thought was on the road to recovery, not to watch her parents receive what amounted to a death sentence for their child. The weight of witnessing such profound grief felt almost unbearable, and he turned to leave them to their privacy. But when he started to step away, Maverick caught his eye through the glass partition. The man's face was streaked with tears, but there was something in his expression that stopped Travis in his track. It wasn't anger or resentment at having a stranger witness their worst moment. It was desperate hope. "Please don't go," Maverick said, his voice cracking as he stepped out of the consultation room. "Paisley has been talking about your visit for weeks. She's been telling everyone at school that Travis Kelce is her friend, that you promised to come see her again. If these are really her last days, could you just be here? Could you help her not be scared?" The request hit Travis harder than any tackle he had ever taken on the football field. This man was asking him to help his daughter die with dignity, to be a source of comfort for a 7-year-old girl facing the unthinkable. Travis nodded, unable to trust his voice to respond appropriately. He had faced some of the toughest defenses in the NFL, had performed under pressure in front of millions of viewers, but nothing had prepared him for this kind of courage. The courage it took to ask a relative stranger to help shepherd their child through her final day. Back in the trauma room, the medical team had managed to stabilize Paisley enough to move her to the pediatric intensive care unit. The transfer process was complicated and terrifying, with machines beeping warnings and nurses calling out numbers that meant nothing to Travis, but clearly indicated serious problem to the medical staff. The sight of Paisley's tiny frame being wheeled through the corridors connected to dozens of tubes and wires was almost too much for anyone to bear. The PICU was a different world entirely, quieter than the emergency room, but somehow more ominous. Each room contained a child fighting for their life, and the hallways were filled with families living through their worst nightmare. Travis had never felt more out of place in his life, but he also knew that he couldn't leave now. Paisley needed him, and more importantly, he needed to be there for her. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor that spoke of organs struggling to function properly, and her breathing was so shallow that Travis found himself holding his breath until he saw her chest rise again. The cancer was literally consuming her from the inside, and every medical intervention seemed to be fighting a losing battle against the aggressive cells that were destroying her body. "Hey there, champion," Travis said softly, pulling a chair close to her bed and trying to keep his voice steady despite the emotional chaos he was feeling inside. "I brought you something special." Paisley's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice, and despite everything happening to her body, despite the pain and the confusion and the fear, she managed the faintest smile when she saw him. It was a smile that broke Travis's heart and put it back together again in the same moment. Travis carefully pulled a small football from his bag, not a regulation size, but a miniature version perfect for small hands. He had bought it months ago during his first visit, intending to give it to her when she was feeling better. Now it seemed like the most important gift he had ever given anyone. "This is from the game where we came back from 21 points down in the fourth quarter," he told her, gently placing the football where she could see it without having to move her head. "Everyone in the stadium thought we were finished, that there was no way we could win. The commentators were already talking about how we had played a good season but come up short. But we never gave up, just like you're not giving up right now." For the next hour, Travis showed Paisley videos on his phone of impossible comeback victories, trick plays that shouldn't have worked according to conventional football wisdom, and moments when everything seemed lost until the very last second. He narrated each play with the enthusiasm of a sports commentator, describing the strategy and the execution in terms that a 7-year-old could understand. Miraculously, as he talked and showed her the videos, Paisley's vital signs began to stabilize slightly on the monitors surrounding her bed. The violent convulsions that had terrified everyone in the emergency room gradually subsided, and she was even able to whisper a few words in response to his story. Her voice was weak and raspy from the breathing tube, but the words were clear and showed that her mind was still sharp despite everything her body was going. "Will you stay?" she asked, her voice barely audible but filled with a hope that broke Travis's heart. The question was simple, but Travis understood the weight behind it. She wasn't just asking him to stay for a few more minutes. She was asking him to be there for whatever came next. "I'm not going anywhere," Travis promised, though he had no idea how he was going to keep that commitment with a football season still in progress and team obligations that couldn't simply be ignored. But looking at Paisley's face, seeing the trust in her eyes, he knew that some promises were more important than any contract or career consideration. Dr. Ashford appeared in the doorway and gestured for Travis to step outside for a moment. In the hallway, away from Paisley's hearing, the doctor's expression was a mixture of professional bewilderment and cautious optimism. "I don't know what you're doing in there," Dr. Ashford said quietly, "but her numbers have improved more in the past few hours than they have in the previous 3 days combined. Her heart rate has stabilized, her blood pressure is responding better to medication, and most importantly, she's alert and responsive. Whatever it is you're doing, please keep doing it." Travis felt a flicker of hope the first time since arriving at the hospital. Maybe his presence really was making a difference. Maybe there was something he could do to help after all. But even as he allowed himself to feel optimistic, he knew that Paisley's underlying condition hadn't changed. The cancer was still there, still growing, still destroying her body from the inside. As if the universe wanted to remind him not to get too hopeful, Paisley's condition took another devastating turn, just as Travis was beginning to believe that maybe, somehow, she might pull through this crisis. Her liver enzymes spiked to dangerous levels on the evening lab work, indicating that her liver was beginning to fail completely. Her kidney function, which had shown slight improvement during the afternoon, dropped to nearly zero, as the organs simply stopped processing the toxins in her blood. By midnight, she had slipped into a coma as her body began the process of systematic shutdown. The machines that had been supporting her were now essentially keeping her alive artificially, and Dr. Ashford was forced to make the difficult decision to begin emergency dialysis to take over the work her kidney could no longer perform. "We need to start dialysis immediately," Dr. Ashford announced to the night shift nurses, his voice heavy with the weight of decisions no doctor ever wants to make. "And someone needs to call the chaplain. The family is going to need support through what's coming next." Travis watched the medical team prepare for what looked like a final battle, knowing that all the football analogies and comeback stories in the world couldn't change the brutal reality that sometimes, despite everyone's best effort, the best team still loses. The monitors around Paisley's bed painted a terrifying picture with their declining numbers, and Travis realized he was about to learn what it really meant to be completely powerless. For 3 agonizing days, Paisley existed in a liminal space between life and death. The dialysis machine took over the work her kidneys could no longer perform, clicking and humming in a mechanical rhythm that became the soundtrack to the family's vigil. A ventilator ensured her lungs continued to function, pushing air in and out of her small body with artificial precision. Travis had called his coach and team manager, officially taking a leave of absence that shocked the entire organization and made headlines in the sports world. He slept in the uncomfortable hospital recliner, ate cafeteria food that tasted like cardboard, and learned the complex rhythm of ICU life. There were shift changes every 12 hours, with new nurses who had to be briefed on Paisley's case and her family's needs. There were doctors' rounds every morning, where teams of medical professionals discussed her case in clinical terms that somehow made the tragedy feel both more real and more surreal. Maverick and Brinley moved through the days like zombies, taking turns holding their daughter's hand and whispering stories about family vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and all the future plans they had made that now seemed impossible. They had stopped asking doctors for updates because the news was always the same, no change, which in Paisley's case meant she was still dying slowly while machines kept her body functioning. The hospital had become their entire world. They knew which vending machines had the best coffee, which nurses were the most gentle when adjusting Paisley's position, and which hours of the day offered the most hope for small improvements in her condition. They had developed a routine around visiting hours and shift changes, creating a sense of normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. On the 3rd day, something impossible happened that would change everything. Paisley's eyes opened suddenly at 6 in the morning, just as the day shift nurses were beginning their round. She looked around the room with complete clarity. as if she had simply been taking a long nap rather than fighting for her life in a coma. The nurses rushed to check her vitals, and Dr. Ashford was summoned immediately from his office. The numbers on her monitors told a story that defied medical explanation. Her kidney function had improved dramatically overnight, jumping from virtually 0 to nearly 30% in a matter of hours. Her liver enzymes, which had been at catastrophically high levels, had dropped to numbers they hadn't seen since her admission to the hospital. Most shocking of all, her white blood cell count showed signs of recovery, suggesting that her immune system was somehow beginning to rebuild itself. "I'm thirsty," Paisley whispered, the first words she had spoken since falling into the coma 3 days earlier. Her voice was weak and scratchy, but it was unmistakably her, unmistakably alive, conscious, and present in a way that none of the medical staff had expected to see again. The ICU erupted in controlled celebration as nurses adjusted medication, and Dr. Ashford ordered a comprehensive new round of tests to understand what was happening in Paisley's body. For 6 precious hours, she was alert, talking, and even managing to eat small amounts of ice chips and clear broth. Travis showed her more football videos on his phone, and she laughed, actually laughed, at a touchdown celebration dance that involved an elaborate series of moves that looked more like a comedy routine than an athletic celebration. "Are you going to teach me that dance when I get better?" she asked, her eyes bright with hope and determination. Travis felt his heart break and soar simultaneously at her question. "Absolutely, champion. You'll be the best dancer on the whole team." But medical miracles in pediatric cancer wards are often temporary and cruel, offering hope before snatching it away again. And everyone who worked in the PICU knew this harsh reality all too well. Dr. Ashford had seen this pattern before. A final surge of energy and clarity before the body gives up completely, like a candle flaring brighter just before it burns out. He didn't want to crush the family's renewed hope, but he also couldn't allow them to believe that this reprieve would last, or that it indicated any real improvement in Paisley's underlying condition. As if summoned by his pessimistic thought, Paisley's temperature began to spike that evening, climbing steadily past dangerous levels despite aggressive intervention with cooling blankets and medication. Within hours, she was burning with fever as a massive infection overwhelmed her already compromised immune system. Her body, already weakened by cancer and organ failure, had absolutely no defenses left against the aggressive sepsis that was now coursing through her bloodstream like poison. The infection moved through her system with terrifying speed, attacking every organ that was still functioning and threatening to shut down her cardiovascular system entirely. Her blood pressure plummeted despite maximum doses of vasopressor medications, and her heart rhythm became erratic and dangerous. The medical team worked frantically to combat the sepsis, but it was like trying to stop a wildfire with a garden hose. "Her white blood cell count is virtually 0, Dr. Ashford explained to the family as they huddled outside her room, watching through the glass as nurses and doctors swarmed around her bed. "The infection is systemic and aggressive, and her body simply doesn't have the immune resources to fight it off. The cancer has destroyed her bone marrow's ability to produce the cells she needs to combat infection. I'm afraid we're looking at hours, not days, before her body completely shuts down." The words hit the family like physical blows, each medical term another nail in the coffin of their hope. Brinley collapsed against the wall, her sobs echoing through the corridor and drawing sympathetic looks from other families who were fighting their own battles with childhood illness. Maverick punched the window so hard that his knuckles split and bled, but he didn't seem to notice the pain or the blood dripping onto the floor. 3 days of watching their daughter fight for her life had drained them of every emotional reserve they possessed, and this final blow felt like more than any human being should be expected to endure. They had already grieved for their daughter once, when she was first diagnosed with cancer, had already faced the possibility of losing her during her initial treatment. To go through this process again, to watch her suffer through another round of false hope, followed by crushing reality, felt like a special kind of torture designed specifically for parents. "There has to be something else," Maverick pleaded with Dr. Ashford, his voice breaking with desperation and rage. "Some experimental treatment, some medication we haven't tried, some specialist who might have a different opinion." She's 7 years old, doctor. 7. She hasn't even lost her first tooth yet. She still believes in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. How can you tell me there's nothing left to try? Dr. Ashford's own professional composure finally cracked completely as he shook his head, tears forming in his eyes for the first time in his career. I've tried everything in my power, every protocol available to us, every experimental treatment that might be appropriate for her case. I've consulted with colleagues across the country, and everyone agrees that we've exhausted our options. Sometimes, despite our best efforts and all the advances in modern medicine, we lose the fight. And I'm sorry, I'm so incredibly sorry, but I believe we're going to lose Paisley tonight. Travis stood in the hallway watching this family's world completely collapse around them, feeling more helpless and useless than he had ever felt in his entire life. All the money in his bank account, all the fame and recognition his career had brought him, all the athletic ability that had made him successful. None of it meant anything when faced with a 7-year-old girl dying of cancer. He couldn't block for her, couldn't catch passes that would save her life, couldn't run plays that would score the winning touchdown against death itself. Inside the room, Paisley lay unconscious again, her small body fighting a war on multiple fronts that she couldn't possibly win. The infection was spreading faster than the most powerful antibiotics could control it, and her already damaged organs were beginning to fail completely under the relentless assault. The monitors showed heart rhythms that were becoming increasingly erratic, blood pressure readings that required constant medication to maintain, and oxygen levels that indicated her lungs were filling with fluid. Dr. Ashford watched the numbers with the grim expression of a man who had seen this particular ending far too many times in his career. In his professional medical opinion, based on 20 years of experience with pediatric oncology and critical care, Paisley Thompson would not survive until morning. The kindest thing he could do now was to make sure she was comfortable and pain-free for whatever time she had left. Travis refused to leave Paisley's bedside, even when the medical staff gently suggested that the family might want some private time to say their final goodbye. Something deep inside him, some stubborn part of his personality, that had served him well on the football field, couldn't accept that this was how the story was destined to end. Not for a little girl who had shown more courage in 7 years than most people displayed in an entire lifetime. As Paisley lay unconscious, connected to machines that were essentially keeping her alive through artificial means, Travis did something that surprised even himself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his Super Bowl ring, the one tangible symbol of his greatest professional achievement, worth more money than most people made in several years, and placed it carefully on the small bedside table where she could see it if she managed to open her eyes. "Hey, Paisley," he whispered, even though she couldn't hear him, and even though talking to an unconscious child felt strange and awkward. "I want to tell you about this ring and what it really..." A lot of people think winning the Super Bowl is about being the best team or having the most talented players, but that's not really the truth. It's about being the team that absolutely refuses to quit when everyone else thinks you should give up. The monitors continued their steady beeping, showing no change in her deteriorating condition, but Travis kept talking anyway. He felt foolish at first, carrying on a one-sided conversation with an unconscious child, but somehow it also felt like the most important conversation of his life. "The game where we won this ring, we were losing by 2 touchdowns with less than 2 minutes left on the clock," he continued, his voice growing stronger even though he was speaking to someone who couldn't respond. "Everyone in the stadium thought it was over. The commentators were already talking about how we had played a good season but come up short when it mattered most. Even some of our own players were starting to give up, thinking about the off-season and what went wrong. But you know what we did instead?" Travis leaned closer to the bed, his voice taking on the intensity he usually reserved for crucial moments in game. "We scored 2 touchdowns in 90 seconds. Impossible touchdowns that defied every statistical probability and football logic. The kind of plays that only happen when you absolutely refuse to accept defeat, even when defeat looks inevitable, and everyone around you has already given up hope." For the next 6 hours, as machines breathed for Paisley and filtered her blood and monitored every aspect of her failing body, Travis told her stories about every comeback victory he could remember. Not just his own games, but legendary moments from football history when teams won contests they had no business winning. He talked about players who got knocked down and got back up again, about coaches who called impossible plays at impossible moments, about fans who never stopped believing, even when hope seemed ridiculous and naive. He told her about the time Brett Favre threw a touchdown pass on Monday Night Football, just hours after learning of his father's death, playing through grief that should have made football impossible. He described Doug Flutie's Hail Mary pass that traveled nearly the entire length of the field to win a college game that seemed utterly lost. He recounted the story of Kurt Warner, who went from stocking shelves in a grocery store to winning the Super Bowl, proving that sometimes the most unlikely people achieve the most extraordinary thing. The thing about real champions, Paisley, Travis said, as dawn light began filtering through the hospital windows, painting everything in soft shades of hope, is that they don't fight because they know they're going to win. They fight because fighting is who they are, even when winning seems completely impossible. They fight because giving up isn't in their vocabulary, because they understand that the game isn't over until the final whistle blows. Around 10 in the morning, something extraordinary happened that would be talked about by the medical staff for years to come. Paisley's eyelids fluttered slightly, and then opened fully. She looked directly at Travis, with eyes that seemed remarkably alert and focused, given everything her body had been through over the past several days. "Is that your actual ring?" she whispered, her voice barely audible but completely clear and coherent. The effort it took her to speak was clearly enormous, but she was determined to communicate. Travis felt his heart stop for a moment as he processed the fact that she was not only conscious but asking questions. "Yes, it is. It's my Super Bowl ring. Do you want to hold it?" Paisley nodded weakly, and Travis carefully slipped the heavy ring onto her tiny finger. It was far too large for even her thumb, but she held it up to catch the morning light streaming through the window. And for a moment, she looked like any other 7-year-old girl admiring a piece of jewelry, rather than a child fighting for her life in a hospital bed. "It's really heavy," she observed, turning her hand to see how the diamonds and precious metals caught the light. "That's because it carries the weight of never giving up," Travis told her, his voice thick with emotion. "It represents all the times when quitting would have been easier, when everyone expected us to lose, when winning seemed impossible. And now it's yours, because you're the strongest champion I've ever met in my entire life." The medical staff was stunned by Paisley's sudden return to consciousness and alertness. Dr. Ashford was summoned immediately and ordered a comprehensive battery of tests to understand what was happening in her body. While they waited for results, Paisley stayed awake and talking, engaging in conversations that seemed impossible given her condition just hours earlier. She asked Travis detailed questions about football, about his teammates, about what it felt like to score touchdowns in front of thousands of screaming fans. She wanted to know about his childhood, about whether he had ever been scared during games, about how he learned to catch passes when they were thrown really hard and fast. "Someday, when I'm better and out of this hospital, will you take me to a real game?" she asked, her eyes bright with hope and determination. "Paisley, when you're better and strong again, you're going to be my special guest at every single home game," Travis promised without hesitation. "You'll have the best seats in the stadium, and I'm going to teach you that touchdown dance we talked about. You'll be part of the team." But even as they shared this moment of unexpected hope and connection, the brutal reality of Paisley's medical condition remained fundamentally unchanged. The infection was still ravaging her compromised immune system, and her organs were still failing despite the temporary improvement in her consciousness and alertness. Dr. Ashford pulled Travis aside with test results that showed no significant improvement in her underlying condition. "I don't understand how she's conscious and alert and able to carry on conversations," the doctor admitted, studying the lab results with a mixture of professional bewilderment and personal amazement. "Medically speaking, given her blood chemistry and organ function, she should be completely unresponsive. Her body is still shutting down systematically, and the infection is still overwhelming her system. But Travis, you need to understand something important. This doesn't change her prognosis. Her body is still in the process of dying." Travis looked back through the window at Paisley, who was now showing her parents the Super Bowl ring and explaining in excited whisper that she was going to be a champion just like Travis. For the first time in days, Maverick and Brinley smiling genuine smile, even though they had just heard the same devastating medical prognosis from Dr. Ashford moments before. Maybe that's exactly the point, Travis said quietly, watching the family share a moment of joy in the midst of their nightmare. Maybe being a champion isn't really about the final outcome or whether you win or lose. Maybe it's about how you choose to face the fight, about finding reasons to smile even when everything seems hopeless. As the afternoon progressed, Travis found himself remembering moments from his own life when he had wanted to give up completely. Injuries that seemed career-ending and had required months' painful rehabilitation. Devastating loss that felt like personal failure and made him question whether he was good enough to play at the professional level. Times when the criticism and pressure from media and fans seemed unbearable and made him consider walking away from football entirely. But nothing he had ever faced in his pampered, privileged life compared to what this 7-year-old girl was going through with such incredible grace and courage. She had endured months of chemotherapy that made her violently sick, radiation treatments that left her exhausted and weak, surgical procedures that most adults would find traumatic. She had lost her beautiful blonde hair, had missed most of her second-grade year, had spent more time in hospitals than at home, and through it all, she had maintained a spirit and optimism that inspired everyone around her. Even now, facing what appeared to be her final battle, she was more concerned about making other people feel better than she was about her own suffering. Dr. Ashford returned in the early evening with information about an experimental treatment that had shown promise in a very small number of similar cases. The protocol was so new and unproven that it had only been tested on a handful of patients worldwide, and the results were mixed at best. More importantly, and more terrifyingly, the experimental treatment carried significant risks that could potentially accelerate Paisley's decline if her already compromised body couldn't handle the aggressive medical intervention required. The treatment protocol involved a combination of targeted immunotherapy drugs and experimental chemotherapy agents that specifically attacked the type of cancer cells they were seeing in Paisley's case. But the side effects could be devastating to someone in her weakened condition. The treatment has only been used in 3 similar cases worldwide, Dr. Ashford explained to the family as they gathered in the small consultation room again. In the first case, a 9-year-old boy in Germany, the patient went into complete remission and has been cancer-free for 2 years. In the second case, a 6-year-old girl in Japan showed temporary improvement and lived for an additional 8 months before ultimately succumbing to the disease. In the third case, an 8-year-old boy in Canada died within hours of beginning the treatment protocol due to complications his weakened system couldn't handle. Maverick and Brinley stared at the doctor, trying to process odds that were essentially a coin flip with their daughter's life. The statistics were brutal in their simplicity. 1 child lived, 1 child died quickly, and 1 child got a few extra months. There was no clear pattern to suggest which outcome Paisley might experience. So we're talking about a 33% chance that she lives and recovers completely. A 33% chance that the treatment kills her faster than the cancer would naturally, and a 33% chance that she gets some additional time, but ultimately doesn't survive? Maverick asked, his voice hollow as he tried to understand the impossible choice they were being asked to make. That's essentially correct, Dr. Ashford confirmed, his own voice heavy with the weight of presenting such devastating options to parents. And I need to be completely transparent with you. Without any treatment intervention at this point, given the progression of the infection and the continued organ failure, Paisley will not survive more than another day or 2. The sepsis and multi-organ dysfunction will claim her life regardless of her incredible fighting spirit and determination. Travis watched from the hallway as the parents struggled with a decision that no human being should ever have to make. How do you choose to potentially kill your child faster in hopes of saving her life? How do you weigh a small chance of survival against the certainty of losing her immediately? How do you make a rational decision when your entire world is collapsing around you? What would you do if she were your daughter? Brinley asked, her voice breaking as she searched Dr. Ashford's face for some guidance, some hint of what the right choice might be. Dr. Ashford was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the question. "I honestly don't know," he finally admitted. "The parent in me would want to try anything that offered even the smallest hope of survival. The doctor in me understands that false hope can sometimes be crueler than accepting reality. This is a decision that only you, as her parent, can make." Travis felt like he was intruding on the family's most private and painful moment. But when he started to step away from the doorway to give them privacy, Paisley's voice called out to him from her hospital bed. Despite everything happening around her, despite the serious conversation and medical discussion, she had been listening and understanding far more than anyone realized. "Travis, come here, please. I want to ask you something important," she said, her voice weak but determined. He approached her bedside, struck once again by how small and fragile she looked, surrounded by all the medical equipment, but also amazed by the strength and clarity he could see in her eyes. She was wearing his Super Bowl ring on a chain around her neck now, since it was too large for any of her fingers, and it caught the light as she moved. "Travis," she said, looking directly into his eyes with an intensity that was remarkable for a 7-year-old, "you told me that champions fight until the final whistle blows, right? That they never give up even when things look impossible?" "That's right, Paisley. Champions never quit, no matter how tough things get. Then I want to try the new medicine that might help me get better, even if it's really scary and even if it might not work. Because that's what real champions do, right? They take the scary plays when the game is on the line and everything matters most." Travis felt tears welling up in his eyes as he looked at this incredible little girl who was facing death with more courage and wisdom than he had ever shown facing any opponent on a football field. She had listened to the medical discussion, understood the risks and the odds, and made a decision about her own life that most adults would find absolutely paralyzing. "Are you sure about this, champion? It's okay to be scared. Even the bravest players get scared sometimes." "I am scared," Paisley admitted, her voice steady despite the fear she was acknowledging. "I'm really scared about what might happen, but I'm more scared of giving up without trying everything possible. And besides," she added, with a small but genuine smile, "I have your championship ring now. That means I have champion power to help me be brave." Maverick and Brinley looked at their daughter with a mixture of overwhelming pride and absolute terror. Their 7-year-old was making a life-or-death decision with more courage and clarity than most adults could manage. But they also recognized the strength and determination in her voice, the same spirit that had gotten her through months of previous treatment and had inspired everyone who met her. "If that's what you really want, baby girl, then that's what we'll do," Brinley said, taking her daughter's free hand and holding it gently. "We're going to fight this together, all of us. We're going to be the strongest team that ever played this game." Dr. Ashford nodded solemnly, clearly moved by the family's courage in the face of impossible circumstances. "I'll begin preparations for the treatment protocol immediately. We'll start first thing tomorrow morning, and I'll be monitoring her constantly throughout the entire process. We'll do everything possible to give her the best chance of success." That night, Travis stayed in the room with the family as they tried to get some rest before what could be Paisley's final battle. The experimental treatment would begin at dawn, and no one knew what the next few days would bring. Paisley fell asleep clutching the Super Bowl ring, and Travis found himself praying to a God he hadn't spoken to in years, asking for just one miracle for the bravest person he had ever met. The experimental treatment began at sunrise, with a team of specialists and enough medical equipment to stock a small pharmacy. Travis had been awake all night, watching Paisley sleep and listening to the steady rhythm of the machine that were keeping her alive. Dr. Ashford arrived with his team, their faces showing both determination and apprehension about what they were attempting. "The next 72 hours will tell us everything we need to know," Dr. Ashford explained, as nurses prepared the IV lines that would deliver the experimental drug. "Her body will either respond positively to the treatment, or it won't. There's no middle ground with this particular protocol." "Aight." Travis held Paisley's hand as the first dose of medication entered her bloodstream through the central line in her chest. She was awake and alert, still wearing his Super Bowl ring on the chain around her neck, and she squeezed his fingers when she felt the cold sensation of the drugs flowing through her system. "It feels weird and cold," she whispered, her eyes wide as she experienced the strange sensation. "That's the medicine going to work like the best players on the team," Travis told her, trying to keep his voice steady and reassuring. "It's like sending in all your strongest players to make the biggest play of the most important game." For the first 24 hours, nothing dramatic changed in either direction. Paisley remained stable, but showed no signs of improvement in her underlying condition. Her temperature stayed dangerously high despite aggressive interventions, her organ function remained severely compromised, and the cancer markers in her blood showed no decrease. Travis began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake by choosing such an aggressive and risky treatment. On the second day, Paisley took a significant turn for the worse. The experimental treatment seemed to be overwhelming her already weakened system, and her blood pressure dropped to dangerously low level despite maximum medical support. Dr. Ashford worked frantically with his team to stabilize her while Travis and the family watched in horror from the hallway, wondering if they had just accelerated their daughter's death. "We might need to stop the treatment protocol," Dr. Ashford said during one of his brief updates to the family. "Her cardiovascular system may not be strong enough to handle the stress of the intervention. We're walking a very fine line between treatment and toxicity." But Paisley, semi-conscious and barely able to speak above a whisper, managed to shake her head when she heard the discussion through the doorway. "No stopping," she whispered, with whatever strength she had left. "Champions don't quit before the game is over." "Doctor?" Ashford made the incredibly difficult decision to continue the treatment while providing additional cardiovascular support through medications and monitoring. It was a calculated risk that could either save her life or end it within hours, but he couldn't ignore the determination of his young patient. On the third day, Travis was dozing fitfully in his chair when a nurse's excited voice woke him up suddenly. "Dr. Ashford, you need to see these lab results immediately." The latest blood work showed something that everyone had hoped for, but no one had dared to expect. Paisley's cancer markers had dropped by 60% overnight, a decrease so dramatic the lab had run the tests 3 times to confirm the results. Her white blood cell count was rising significantly, indicating that her immune system was beginning to respond and rebuild itself. Most importantly, her kidney and liver function tests showed marked improvement for the first time since her admission. "I don't understand how this is possible," Dr. Ashford said, staring at the lab results with amazement. "This level of improvement shouldn't be medically possible this quickly. It's as if her body suddenly remembered how to fight the cancer." But the numbers didn't lie, and they continued to improve over the following day. Over the next week, Paisley's condition improved at a rate that defied every medical textbook and challenged everything Dr. Ashford thought he knew about pediatric oncology. The massive infection that had nearly killed her was completely gone. Her organs began functioning normally again, processing toxins and maintaining proper fluid balance. Most miraculous of all, the cancer that had been destroying her body from multiple directions was in rapid retreat. 2 weeks after beginning the experimental treatment, Paisley was sitting up in bed, eating solid food with appetite, and pestering the nurses to let her walk around the pediatric ward. 3 weeks later, she was officially declared cancer-free for the first time since her original diagnosis. The medical staff called it the most remarkable recovery they had ever witnessed. 6 months later, Travis pulled up to the Thompson family's house for a very different kind of visit. Paisley came running out of the front door at full speed, completely healthy and energetic, wearing a miniature Kansas City Chiefs jersey with his number on it. Her blonde hair had grown back thicker and more beautiful than before, and she still wore his Super Bowl ring on a chain around her neck like a talisman. "Travis, look what I can do!" she shouted with pure joy, and proceeded to perform the touchdown dance he had promised to teach her months ago in the hospital. Her parents stood on the front porch, tears of gratitude streaming down their faces as they watched their daughter celebrate life with boundless enthusiasm. "How does it feel to be a Super Bowl champion?" Travis asked, kneeling down to her level as she finished her elaborate dance routine. Paisley grinned and held up the championship ring that hung around her neck. "I think I won something even better than the Super Bowl. I won my whole life back, and I learned that I'm braver than I ever thought I could be." As Travis hugged this remarkable little girl, who had taught him the true meaning of courage and determination, Paisley whispered in his ear the words that would stay with him forever. "Thank you for teaching me that even when everyone thinks you're going to lose, you still have to keep playing until the final whistle blows. Sometimes the best victories happen when winning seemed completely impossible. And sometimes being a real champion means fighting for something way more important than any game, fighting for your life and never giving up hope." Travis smiled as he realized that in trying to give hope and strength to a dying child, Paisley had given him something far more valuable: the understanding that true championship courage isn't measured by trophies or rings or statistics, but by the refusal to surrender when surrender seems like the only rational option.